A frequent question I get is, how do I achieve my skin tones using Photoshop? Well, in this video, I'm gonna give you 3 different techniques on achieving fantastic skin tones, and we're gonna cover todo el pedo. Now, to begin, when you're color toning your skin, you want to do dodge and burn and frequency separation first. Now, whatever process you use to retouch your skin, you're gonna do that first before you color grade your skin tone. Now, there's 3 different ways that I like to color grade my skin tone, and the first being selective color, color balance, and gradient maps. Now, you can do these in any order that you want, but in my case, I'm gonna show you first selective color. Now, the numbers that I'm using in this video, it's not so much about these magic numbers that a lot of you guys are thinking. It's the theory behind why I'm choosing these numbers, and that's what I'm hoping to achieve in this video. So let's jump into Photoshop. So once we're in Photoshop, we have our layers panel, and I'm gonna go to the adjustment layer icon down here. I'm gonna go ahead and choose selective color, and what makes selective color powerful is typically the skin tone is gonna lie in the reds and in the yellows. So knowing that, I can specifically select those tones and tone that specific area. So in this case, with selective color, I can tone the reds and the yellows. And once again, that is where the skin tone is gonna lie in. So here, if I go into the reds, I can drag it to the left and I can drag it to the right. If I drag it to the right, my cyan, you're gonna notice that I'm adding a lot of green, which is not great. If I wanted to add more luminance to my reds, I would drag it to the left, and you're gonna notice that the skin tone gets a nice little bright red. If I go into the magentas, I can drag this to the left. You'll notice that it gets this kind of like awkward yellow, which I don't like. And if I go to the right, it adds this nice red tone to it, but it's a little too much. So this is where I would decide, well, maybe I would go to +4. And then now I can tone my yellows. And if I drag it to the left, it's gonna make it more purple, magenta-ish. And if I drag it to the right, it's gonna add a little bit more yellow, which is actually pretty cool. So and one little tip, as I'm dragging it to the right and I'm adding this yellow, you have to decide what setting am I currently shooting in. Am I shooting during golden hour, blue hour? Is it natural light? Am I shooting in shade? That's gonna help me determine, should I be adding more yellows or should I not be adding that much yellow to kind of match the overall scenery. In this case, there's not a lot of, this was almost like getting close to blue hour, so I'm not gonna add so much yellow. So now we're gonna go into the yellow section under selective color, and the same process. We're gonna kind of go over the cyans, magentas, and the yellows. So if I drag it to the left, you'll notice that I add those nice little red tones to the image, and if I drag it to the right, it adds that ugly green, which we don't want. Now, once again, you're gonna have to determine, based on your image, what numbers is gonna make sense. Now, you can sit there, mijita, and write all these numbers down, but it's not gonna match up to your image because I use high-speed sync, the time of day that I was shooting, so it's gonna kind of be determined based off of your specific scene. So in my case, I would probably go around -6. My magentas, I'm gonna play around with that and kind of eyeball it. I'm gonna actually add just a little bit, maybe like +2, and then we'll go into our yellows, and I would maybe add +2. So if I click the before and after, this is the before, and then this is the after. This is just a subtle change in the skin tone. Let me actually zoom in just in case you guys can't see this. I'm gonna push Z on the keyboard. I'm gonna zoom in here, and I'm gonna click the eyeball here, the before, and then the after. It's just a very subtle effect. Now, keep in mind, when I'm doing selective color and I'm doing the reds and the yellows, we know that we're trying to tone specifically the skin. Now, if you have a lot of reds and yellows in your background, where you're also toning that. So if you don't wanna be messing with your background, this is where you would wanna use layer masks. Now, I'm just gonna briefly go over what layer masks are. Basically, the layer mask is this. When you add a selective color, this yellow or this white square basically means that that effect is being applied to everything. So anything that was outside of her skin tone that was red or yellow was also being toned. So the overall image is being toned, once again, but just the reds and the yellows, not these greens and not these blues, because I was using selective color. But if I wanted to specifically only paint in the skin tone color grade on the skin, what I would do is I would make this a black mask. So I would just press Ctrl-I. So black basically means this effect is no longer showing. I would get a brush, set it to white. Let me make sure my flow is all the way up. And then basically I would just brush in this color grade only on the skin tone so that I'm not affecting any other areas in the image. Now, once again, that's gonna be up to you. In this particular case, it really didn't affect the background too much, but just giving you a little quick tip there. And so that is how I use selective color. I'm usually in my reds and in my yellows. The next one that we're gonna cover is color balance. So let's get into that one. Now, before I get into color balance, I do want to show you another image using selective color and show you how much different the numbers are, because I'm trying to emphasize that there is no magic number. Every image is going to be different. So the image here that I did with Ruth, on selective color on the reds, I did -14 on the cyan, the magentas +3, the yellows +7, and -1 on the blacks. And then on the yellows, I did -2, +1, and then +3. So let's go ahead and get into color balance. Now, color balance, the way I like to look at this one is now I'm specifically toning the highlights, midtones, and the shadows. And what's powerful about this one is that now I can tone the highlights, the shadows, and the midtones. So in order to make a color balance layer, we're gonna go into the layers panel, and down here, we're gonna click the adjustment layer icon. And we're gonna go ahead and choose color balance. Now, my thought process when I'm doing color balance is, well, I shoot high speed sync. So knowing that, obviously, sorry, I lost my tongue there. So I use off-camera flash, and knowing that, obviously the skin in my image of my subject is gonna be bright. It's gonna be in the highlights, right? So now I can specifically tone the skin tone with color balance by selecting the highlights. So if we go here from midtones, or it says tone, I go to shadows, midtone, and highlights. If I go to the highlights, we've already talked about this. The skin tone always lies in the yellows and in the reds. And I'm specifically targeting the highlights because my face is gonna be bright because of that strobe light. So I'm gonna go into my yellows and I'm gonna tone that. And if I drag it to the left, it's gonna add a lot of yellow. So I might add, for this image, I might add somewhere around -6. Then I do wanna push back in just a little bit of reds. So I'll go and add maybe +2 to my reds. Also in the skin tones, so we have the highlights. We're also gonna have a lot of midtones. So we're gonna go into the midtones now, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna maybe add just a little bit of yellow, and that's obviously too much. So I'm gonna maybe add -2. And then this one, I'm probably gonna add +1. And then the shadows, this is gonna be subjective. So I'm gonna get my zoom tool here so you guys can see this. I'm gonna zoom in. Now for the shadows, it's gonna rely right in this general area and here. So this is maybe where I might wanna add some reds and maybe just to add just a little bit of yellows. Now that's gonna be, once again, up to you. It's gonna be subjective. I'm gonna press Control- here to zoom out. So let's look at the color balance. Let me actually zoom back in here. And let's look at the before and after. So if I hit the eyeball, this was the before. Kind of paled, really can't see too much skin tone color. And this is the after, just a subtle effect once again. So before and then the after. So now we're gonna go ahead and cover the last one, which is the gradient maps. And I'm gonna show you how I finalize my skin tone using gradient maps. Now the last one is gradient maps. And in order to get the gradient maps, we're gonna go back to the layers panel and we're gonna go to the adjustment layer. So what you're gonna find is you're gonna find here your adjustment layer icon. We're gonna choose, this time we're gonna go to gradient map. Now when you go to gradient map, you're gonna have this properties dialog box that appears, and you can choose different colors. And if I hit this drop down arrow, you'll have a variety of gradient maps to choose from. But what's cool is that Photoshop already provides you with some free, awesome photo toning gradient maps. If I click this little gear here, you're gonna wanna choose photographic toning and then add it to your list. Now, once you've done that, you should have available many different types of gradient maps. And if I select it, you're gonna notice, you're probably thinking like, what in the fudge bar is going on here? This is just weird stuff. So if I select this one, what we're gonna need to do in the blend mode that I like the most for this is soft light. Now, you all can experiment with the blend modes, but I've been using soft light and that works out great for me. So when you apply the gradient map, you're gonna go from here, from normal to soft light. And you'll notice that the effect appears very, very strong. What I'm gonna wanna do here is I'm gonna want to lower the opacity so that the effect isn't as strong. So we're gonna go from opacity 100 and let's try somewhere between like 25 and 30. You know what, let's start off with 30. And let's look at some of the different colors. So if I can get to 30, there we go. If I click the eyeball, this is the before and then this is the after. Let's zoom into the skin tone and you'll notice that it gets this nice little orange brownish tones because this is the one I chose here. And if I choose a different one, there's many, many different types of gradient maps that work great for the skin tone. You just kind of have to experiment with the different options. In this case, I'm probably gonna go with something like, let me see what else we got here. And let me just choose, let's go with this one here. So if I click the before and then the after, it kind of just makes those brown tones a little bit more richer. Now, once again, you guys can experiment with yourself, but what I want to do is I want to click here. And when I click this little gradient editor, this part is very, very helpful. Here's a little pro tip here, is when I have this, what essentially I'm doing is this little gradient, how is it actually color grading? Well, because I set it to soft light, the areas to the left of the image are my blacks, this area is my shadows, this area is my midtones, this area is my highlights, and this area is my whites. So wherever this area lands on, this brown, that means that this brown is now being added into my shadows in the image. This light brown here is being applied to my midtones in the image, and this light brown color is being added into my highlights. Now I can control that. Let's say I wanted the transition to be a little bit more dramatic. I can click this square and I could say, you know what? I want more of this dark brown to enter into my midtones. So this little transition, this little square, I can adjust that. I can say, you know what? Transition more into my midtones. Or I can push this back. Or I can push this little square back from my midtones and I want it to transition into my shadows. And maybe I want this to transition a little bit more into my midtones. So here, you guys have to really experiment with this. This is super, super powerful stuff. I'm gonna leave it more or less right about here. And what's cool about soft light, by the way, is because this is black over here and this is white, this will not affect my highlights and my whites. This little dark square is not gonna go into my blacks or into my shadows, okay? So that's what's really cool. So if I hit okay, if I click the eyeball, the before and then the after, it adds it to the entire image. So if you do not want that to happen, you can always invert your mask by pressing Ctrl-I and then just getting the brush tool and then specifically just brushing this little color grade over your skin. I'm just doing this quick. You know, I don't have my tablet set up right now, so I'm just gonna do this quick, but you get the overall idea. And once again, you can always just click the eyeball. This is the before and after. It's a little bit too dark for me. I'm gonna bring it down to maybe 15, 12. And the numbers, once again, is gonna determine based off of your image. Now, before I let you go, I'm gonna end this video with a couple of different photos, some of my more popular photos on Instagram, and I'm gonna show you the settings, the selective color, the color balance, and the gradient map, and show you all of my settings on how I got those skin tones for those specific images. So with that said, guys, don't forget to follow me on Instagram. I provide a lot of helpful content like behind the scenes, posing tips, and some breakdowns as well. So check me out on Instagram, and obviously please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That'd be super helpful, and I would appreciate your guys' support. So with that said, guys, this is Eli Infante and saying peace out, and I'll see you guys on the next video.